questions relating between motion number 3 and motion number 1. No one deemed to respond to why they were moving to remove me from the board. And then finally, the next thing I asked was, have the shareholders received the letter from CoinFund? At that point, the meeting went silent. And I waited for 10 minutes, and I heard nothing. My partner, who's in the room with me, heard nothing. So if they conducted any further meeting after that, they did so without me in the room. Then the conference call was disconnected, and I dialed back in immediately, and I am currently waiting for the leader of the conference call to rejoin. I doubt that they will, but I'm going to give it a full hour to make sure that I have discharged any obligation to be present to the meeting. So as near as I can tell, nothing was conducted, nothing happened, apart from opening with the motions, and then giving me the opportunity to make a statement, and then dead silence.
Very strange.
Yeah, well, certainly, if that's that is not a way to conduct a meeting, and I'm sure that it violates a number of protocols with respect to these sorts of meetings. I did bring up the point of extraterritoriality, which I do believe applies in this particular case. The Synereo legal counsel disputes this, but that's going to be, a point to argue. But basically, the meeting did not happen.
Greg, I don't understand that legal term. Can you explain it?
Yeah, so in the case of U.S. securities law, extraterritoriality applies. So the U.S. securities can go after foreign companies operating on foreign soil. And in this case, there's a strong case that there is a securities here, and in which case the SEC has successfully prosecuted against and fined and otherwise penalized companies for wrongdoing.
Okay, yeah, I understand the general issue. So have you tried to reach Dora on Slack and Skype and the other channels?
No, Dora kicked me out of Slack.
Okay.
It looks like there was a post. I can't tell. It looks like there was some kind of post.
In announcements, he just sent something.
Okay. So if there was.
Do you have that, Greg?
I see it. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I see it. So essentially, the meeting was conducted without me, which I'm sure violates a number of protocols here. All right. So, any other questions? I really want to thank everyone for their participation in the process. I know it's been a difficult process. I believe that there's more than enough support for the RChain vision, and I will certainly pursue that quite vigorously. As you know, we have a letter of intent for a fairly large raise, the next steps are, from my point of view. So it looks like, I'm just going to go ahead. Since Dor has already sent the announcement, I'm going to go ahead and hang up here. Andy, you're on. That's great. So I didn't hear anything after I asked my question if the shareholders had received the letter from CoinFund. There was nothing, and I at a certain point I called out and said, "Hey, I can't hear you. Have I been booted out of this meeting?"
You have never been booted, and
well, I have a witness here who says that there was no sound coming from the meeting after I asked that question.
Yes, that is correct.
So what that says is that the meeting was conducted without me being present.
What happened is nobody could hear you on the call after the initial statements.
Then again, I was not present for the meeting.
Was there a roll call on those votes?
So
was there a roll call on the votes?
What do you mean?
Person by person, yay or nay on each vote.
Except for Bank to the Future, all were proxied.
Greg, proxy?
I'm sorry, I have a vote.
Yes, that's correct. I believe Greg did not vote.
No, I wanted to vote, but no one asked me to vote.
Understood. So I have no idea what this means from a legal standpoint.
Okay, great. Well,
so Andy, was there other business conducted in addition to those 3 votes?
No, the meeting has been adjourned once the agenda has been finalized. Just a second, I have a Skype call.
So A sending $100. Yeah. You don't want to send 100. Okay, so it's sending no, but it doesn't have to 100. Okay, no, fine. That's fine. 100 is fine.
okay, so anyway, so while Andy is taking his call, let's talk about some next steps. So the next step is, as soon as possible, I will set up an RCoin 0, which holders of AMPs can exchange for a coin that will operate on the RChain network. And I will make the exchange such that when it's a 1-for-1 exchange, and the AMPs that we receive, we will burn. And the RChain 0 coin will be an omni asset, and it will ultimately be converted to an asset that runs on the RChain. I will only recognize the RChain 0 coins as the means by which AMPs trace provenance onto RChain. So that will be the principal path by which AMPs can make it to RChain.
Greg?
Yes.
Is RChain 0 have any exclusivity of the tokens to be issued on RChain for a period of time, or is that to be determined?
That's to be determined.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. So you're asking, do they have a lead time with respect to the multi-coin option?
Exactly.
Oh, yes, they do.
So why make that commitment now as opposed to 6 months from now or whatever?
No, I mean, I think it's a fair, having a little bit of a lead time is a good thing. Ultimately, it's really good to have the multi-coin option, because then that gives those holders of RChain that came from AMPS, that gives the ability to have reach from the attention economy to the into the other coin distribution networks.
Yeah, it gives and it honors the investors that have invested in AMPS thus far.
Yeah, it also
sure.
also AMPS that invest in AMPS for sure. Yep. And again, that's my sincerest wish, is to make sure that those people who invested in AMPS, especially those people who invested in AMPS, was those people who invested in AMPS, who did so in order to see the RChain vision made real. They should absolutely see that happen.
Well, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
The timing of that exchange, I would imagine, will take some time to set up, a month or something, or weeks.
Oh, much less than that. Much
Cool.
less than that. Yeah, I'm not gonna make any commitments right now, because I'm in Nairobi, but that will be forthcoming very soon.
Will early persons that will it be in a way that the earlier you convert your AMPS, the better the rate is going to be, or how is this going to be handled?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I absolutely think that it's a reasonable thing to consider. Expressing confidence by accepting, by taking a position earlier is always a good thing. Here, I'm not really. I just want to make sure that every AMP holder who wants to convert has the opportunity to convert, right? And there can be a period of time before this idea reaches all members of the community, right? And so I don't want people who don't hear about it to be undue or unfairly treated, right? I want people to be able to hear, get sufficient time to hear about the conversion, so that they have an opportunity to act and be made whole.
Right, and I'll just say the kinds of usual things that you and others need to be careful about from a securities perspective. That there's no promise of future value for RChain 0 from a token perspective, and
oh yeah, so be super clear, right? The token is to enable the ability to run the Rho VM, right?
Exactly, that's its purpose, not speculation and promise of any future value.
Yeah, that's correct. And in addition, the token, and this is the principal value of the token is to enable the attention economy features. So those are the two things that are unlocked by having the token. With the token, you can unlock the access to the Rho VM and therefore run smart contracts. And with the token, you can have you can do things like promote posts and other kinds of things like that. So that's the principal use of the token, and anything else is really out of our control, right? In the same way that a company that prints comics cannot prevent a market around comic collecting and comic exchange, right? There's nothing that the company there can reasonably do. They're putting out a publication for entertainment, and yet people collect them and trade them, and they increase in value or decrease in value relative market demand. And that's entirely outside of Marvel Comics control or outside of DC Comics control, for example. Similarly here, the RChain token is entirely to enable these features, and we will provide a path. So we will provide a path so that people who purchase stamps to see the RChain vision realized will have the opportunity to do so.
So one of the change in scope that you've, I think, implicitly made over the last couple of weeks, or certainly in this announcement, is that RChain project will build out an attention economy, and separately you referenced a metered and monetized content delivery network. Those things used to be outside of RChain proper, and I guess I'd still want you to consider those as potentially being outside of RChain proper, even though on top of the ecosystem they could be built. So I'd like more discussion on that versus a firm position.
Oh, that's a fair comment to make. The thing that we've wanted to see is to have some understandable milestones, right? So some things that people who are not programming language wonks can sink their teeth into in order to observe the progress and delivery of RChain.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
Right, and so the attention economy systems contracts are things that people who have an interest in social communications and social platforms would be able to and as I might say, sink their teeth into. And so that's the way that they can track the progress of the RChain, because you couldn't run those systems level contracts if you didn't have the RChain running. Likewise for the metered and monitored content delivery, right? Those are things that are ways to measure the progress of the RChain.
Yeah, I guess I'd like and encourage you to explore some simpler use cases on top, because my concern is that RChain is already very large in its scope, and then taking these on in addition, especially from the RChain cooperative's perspective, I worry about it all getting done. So anyway, I hope for more debate on what's in and out of scope.
Yeah, it's really I like the fact that you bring this up. One of the things that has been made crystal clear, I think, in summarizing some of the technical details, but there were a number of people who've come forward to do technical review. One of them was David Curran. And he's done a nice job of kind of digging in to technical review to make sure that the stuff that we're talking about is real, and there's enough substance there that it's it's to be believed. I was incredibly encouraged that as an independent reviewer, he basically reported to me that he was fully confident that this was a real thing. In fact, he made a really nice comment that he said, he found himself swearing out loud in terms of how big the value prop is here. So I was incredibly pleased by that. But what I wanted to show, and the reason I went to screen share, is while RChain is big in scope in a certain way, I want to point out, even if you don't understand this code, the runtime portion of the semantics for the contracts fits on 2 pages if you have the right sort of primitives. And then what's even more interesting, and I find this to be really important, is that the set of primitives that we're talking about for a contracting language and a contracting semantics that needs to be supported by the VM comes to a grand total of 7, right? So these are 7 very, very simple little building blocks for building contracts, and everything else follows from that. So the correctness of the virtual machine, the correctness of the language that compiles to those primitives, the correctness of the compilation from the primitives to the virtual machine, all of that follows from these little one-liner definitions. So while the scope is large, it's also very, very contained. And one of the things that we can show demonstrably is that these 7 primitives for writing down, reasoning about, executing, and analyzing smart contracts or social contracts is that this is more expressive and more expressive in measurable ways than any proposal, whether we're talking about Solidity or Serpent or the contracting mechanism within the Bitcoin blockchain. It's strictly more expressive and has many other features. And so if you want to learn about that, I strongly recommend that you take a look at the mobile process calculator for programming the blockchain draft that is to be a companion with the RChain architecture document. And hopefully that will help frame the discussion of scope for people who want to get engaged or just stay in touch with what's going on with the development. So any other questions or comments?
Yeah, just Greg, one more thing about the RChain technology. There will be multi-coin support for AMPS, Ether, and Bitcoin. Is that the plan, intended plan?
I'm so glad you asked that. So the thought is that there is going to be multi-coin support. The path for AMPS has an extra hop in it. So there will be multi-coin support for RCoin 0 and Ether and Bitcoin. So in order for an AMP to have a value on the RChain, the AMPs have to be converted to the RCoin 0, which is sort of an intermediate coin, which allows to express investor preferences. This is awesome.
I'm a little bit concerned, Greg, that there's a time lag before people can actually buy the RChain 0. And,
yes,
and during that time, people who are behind RChain will buy Synereo AMPs, and the money will not go to RChain.
Yeah, of course. I absolutely hear you on this, Jim. And so we're going to move very swiftly. I don't want to make promises about the timeline, but I do want to say that it's going to be very swift. I'm in Nairobi, and so it's just there's just a little bit of uncertainty about access to compute resources, but very, very quickly here. I will be setting up the RCoin 0 and the exchange. So that's the idea. So Hamza, you raise a good point, and I've thought about that. So it is an interesting question. The AMPs won't necessarily have a price rise if there's a sufficient number of people who take this path, right? So if there's a sufficient number of people, then over time, the coin just simply has no utility, right? There's no utility. Door has no utility for AMPs currently. They're only used for speculation, so if there are fewer and fewer people speculating, if the volume just continues to drop, then I think the market becomes less and less interesting for people. And as they see more and more happening with respect to RChain, they'll realize that that's kind of the place where we want to be.
Hey, Greg, what will you do with your founders AMPs? And if you do mint the new token, will you be contacting Poloniex to let them know what has happened?
Yeah, no, I think that's it's certainly certainly in the cards to let them know, let the major exchanges know, including Poloniex. I'll be honest, I still don't know what to do with my founders amps. I think this is, I haven't touched an amp because I think it's unethical while we're developing this to do anything in the way of engaging with that trading. I think it sends the wrong signal. It just sends the wrong signal. And if we really want the coin signal to aggregate or provide a way to aggregate the market, then having someone who is this central to the development engaged in trading would just look and smell and feel wrong. So let's see, what else do we have? Yes, so the RChain Co-op is in the process of being established as a legal entity in Washington. Yes, that's correct. So we can think of the RChain Co-op as standing in the long and successful tradition of REI and PCC and other incredibly successful Washington state co-ops.
Yeah, there's a Slack channel on the RChain Slack co-op channel, and I just took REI's bylaws, and copy them, change the word, REI to RChain, because that's required for domain name registration for a .coop domain. So we're in the process of setting up RChain.coop as the domain name. And if anyone wants to help with the setup of RChain from a legal perspective, please comment in that channel.
Ed, one question. I saw CoinFund's letter, sorry, I don't know if it's CoinFund, but someone also mentioned that you would need to set up a for-profit entity in the United States as well as the nonprofit. Is that
right? Yeah, for some investors like Auto Capital and other large investors, they'll require a for-profit U.S. entity. So Greg and I and this investor, David Otto, have talked about two potential vehicles for that. One is a brand new entity called something like RChain Incubator, which would have the job of making investments profitable, and that would include investment or grants to RChain Cooperative as part of that. And initially that would be heavy, and then over time that would probably taper off and shift investments to profitable endeavors. And then so RChain Incubator is one idea, and LivelyGig is the other idea. And the idea of the benefit of LivelyGig is that it's already set up. The bank accounts and reporting is already established, so it could move quicker. So anyway, we haven't finished those conversations, but those are the two most likely options in my mind.
So another point here is that the someone has asked, is the conversion atomic cross-chain or via exchanges? So from AMP to RCoin 0 is just one omni property for another. That's it. RCoin 0 for the RChain token is going to be it's a cross chain, right? So the conversion, the mechanics of the conversion will be somewhat different, but morally, spiritually, it will be the same process. And here, all we're doing is we're just providing a chain of custody from for those investors who invested in AMPs for the promise of RChain. So I did want to hear. Let's see. I thought that Jake Bruckman was on, and I wanted to get your take if you're still on. Jake, are you still on?
Hey, Greg, I'm still on. How are you?
Good.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm not sure. I'm just a like taking in the situation. I was kind of curious, like, what was the content of your statement to the shareholders?
Oh, I didn't even get a chance to make the statement. I needed to ask a few points of clarification. So number one, I asked about why they were moving to remove me from the board, and no one answered that question. Then I asked a question of clarification relating motion number 3 on the docket to motion number 1, and no one wanted to answer the question. And then I asked, had they received your letter? And at that point, my phone line went dead.
Got it. Well, I mean, from where I sit at the moment, like, my sense is that, kind of looking over at the Slack and messaging written there, it seems that there is a class of investors, right, who supported RChain. That was sort of their primary reasoning for investing in Synereo AMPs. I can tell you that was our reasoning for investing in Synereo AMPs. If from the sentiment that I'm kind of reading off the Slack at the moment, it seems like they're not happy with the idea of Synereo going on without RChain.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm not sure what the outcome of this is going to be, but it's possible that legal actions could be taken in that vein by that class of investors.
Yeah, I think that's a distinct possibility, and that was in fact what bound my actions. So I didn't really have any options in terms of the things that I was doing. Once it became clear to me that there was the possibility that Synereo would not follow through on its promises to investors, I was legally bound to let investors and shareholders know what was going on. And then I'm so grateful to you, Jake, and to others who came forward and let shareholders know that what I was talking about was not just a myth, but in fact there was substantive evidence for this. And so every step of the way, everything that I did, down to the last minute, which was to offer additional funding to Synereo as a part of the RChain incubator. Everything I did was in the service of trying to make sure that equity and shareholders, shareholders were made whole. In fact, better than whole, and that investors in AMPs were made whole, and in fact, better than whole. So I very much appreciate you being a part of that process, and everyone else who has been a part of that process. I have to say, I feel really optimistic. We've got the intent to have quite a large investment in RChain. It's not quite what Ethereum raised, but because we have we have the hindsight. We have Ethereum a few years on, and we have a really solid architecture that is now essentially in its 3rd generation, having been sort of developed and deployed at industrial scales for the last 20 some odd years. I think we can get to market pretty fast, and that the investment that we're looking for from Auto Capital will certainly allow us to do that. I think it is important to recognize that even after the technology is delivered, there's a whole other aspect of this in terms of making contact with the market that has to do with user adoption and that kind of thing. And so that's a different kind of spend and a different kind of work. But the 8 to 10 million that we're looking at in terms of this next round of funding is certainly enough to get the tech to where we want it to be to begin that next phase of work. Awesome. So is there anything else that people want to ask about? It's 8:09 where I am, and I have had 1.5 meals today. I'd love to be able to have some dinner, and I think my daughter would as well.
Greg?
Yes.
Sorry, I just have one quick question real quick too, in regards to, the community governance of RChain itself. Have you started to think about that? Because now with this fresh perspective, there's fresh opportunities essentially to start anew.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, part of that is already underway if you go look at the bylaws that were pasted in the RChain co-op. But let me just turn it around and say, how do we wish to govern ourselves? I'm really sort of wide open here. I'm looking for processes that are flexible and agile, but that in which people feel that they have a real voice. I've talked at length about how I think there needs to be a means by which we can aggregate the signal of the community. There needs to be a signal that comes from people who are in day-to-day touch with the technology and making it work, and there needs to be a signal from people who are in a more advisory or sort of objective or neutral capacity, and that you can kind of imagine that there are relative scales, right? So things that are related to, say, 7 or 8 figure spends, those have to involve all 3 signals, and they have to involve a process up front in terms of alerting the community, educating the community on issues around such a deployment of resources, and then also a retrospective, with respect to whether or not that was a good decision. So that's whereas below those kinds of thresholds, we might want to consider a more agile processes that don't require all 3 signals. So those are the kinds of thoughts that I've had, and I've voiced them before. But I really want to hear from other people as to what they want.
I've taken a first pass, along with others in Synereo.cc, of creating the kind of structure that you've been advocating since the beginning. It's collaborative, it's flexible, provides autonomy and a structure of the stakeholders that can be decisive.
Good. Well, let's get educated on that, and I'm looking forward to it, actually. All right. Anything else that people we feel is a burning issue we need to talk about before I go get some dinner? Cool. Well, I think this has been. I feel really grateful to have been a part of the process of making sure that my part of the process was transparent, that everything I did, people understood why I did it, and that I was open and available to all the community, in terms of the business requirements, the legal requirements, as well as the technical. So with that, thank you all, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday, if not before.
Thank you for the updates, Greg, and enjoy your dinner.
Thank you. All right. Ciao, guys.
Bye.